Give me work. Mr. Thorne, I will care for your children. Adeline Miller stood in the dusty Wyoming yard. She did not move. She did not blink. It was late spring of 1889. The afternoon already carried the dry, punishing heat of summer. Adeline wore a faded light green dress. The fabric was thin from too many washings. She held a small cloth bundle against her chest. It contained nearly everything she had left in the world. Garrett Thorne stared at the widow. His eyes were hard like flint. Beside him stood his two children. 8-year-old Toby watched her cautiously. He looked like a miniature version of his father. 6-year-old May clung to Garrett's sturdy leg. Their clothes were worn and stained. Their hair was a wild tangle of knots. Adeline could see the truth at once. This was a family merely surviving. They were living without a woman's care. The porch was thick with undisturbed dust. Garrett's expression hardened even further. "I didn't ask for help," he said. His voice was like gravel. "No," Adeline said quietly, "but your children need it." Garrett's jaw tightened. A muscle pulsed in his tanned cheek. Adeline knew she had pushed too far, but hunger had already taken her pride. Her husband, Thomas, had died of fever months earlier. Since then, she had walked from one temporary shelter to another. She carried her life in that small cloth bundle. Now she had reached the Thorne Ranch. She had no money. She had nowhere else to go. The Wyoming sun weighed heavily on her shoulders. She tightened her arms around the bundle. "I don't need wages," she whispered. Garrett said nothing. His hat was pulled low over his brow. "Give me a roof, a little food, and a place to sleep." She glanced toward Toby and May. "I'll cook. I'll mend their clothes. I'll keep your house. And I'll care for your children as if they were my own." Something changed in Garrett's eyes. It was a flicker of something human. It only lasted for a second. Then the wall of coldness returned. "I don't need a nanny, Mrs. Miller." Adeline's remaining hope collapsed. She felt the weight of the road in her bones. She lowered her eyes to the dry earth. The air tasted of sagebrush and defeat. "I understand," she said. She turned back toward the main road. The dust of her long walk was gray on her hem. She had taken only 3 steps when Garrett spoke. "Wait." Adeline stopped. She did not breathe. Garrett looked at his children. Toby's face was guarded and far too old for his age. May was hiding, clutching her father's trousers. Their mother, Sarah, had been dead for a year. Garrett had kept the ranch alive. But he had forgotten how to make a house feel like a home. The ranch showed the scars of her absence. He looked back at Adeline. "I said I don't need a nanny." Adeline slowly turned around. She searched his face for a sign. "Then what do you need?" Garrett removed his hat. For the first time, he looked less like a hardened rancher. He looked like a tired father who had run out of answers. "A partner," he said. Adeline stared at him. The wind kicked up a sudden swirl of grit. Garrett took a deep breath. "I can give you my name, my roof, and the protection of this ranch." Adeline's brow tightened. "What are you saying?" Garrett looked directly into her eyes. "Marry me." Adeline forgot how to breathe. The bundle almost slipped from her numb fingers. Of all the answers she had imagined, this was not one. "You don't even know me," she whispered. "No," Garrett said. He glanced at his children. "But I know you came here asking for work when you could barely stand. I know you looked at my children before you looked at my house. And I know I can't keep pretending they don't need someone." Adeline looked at little May. The girl had blue eyes like a clear summer sky. "Not tonight," Garrett continued. "I'm asking whether you would agree to the arrangement. We can send for a preacher when you've had time to decide. Until then, you'll have a roof and food. If you still say yes when the preacher comes, we'll make it legal." Adeline thought of the husband she had buried in Laramie. She thought of the cold nights spent under a wagon. She thought of her own empty, aching arms. "Yes," she whispered. The word was a quiet, solemn vow. Garrett didn't smile. He didn't reach for her hand. "Toby, take Mrs. Miller's bundle inside." Toby approached her carefully. He was built like his father, sturdy and quiet. Adeline handed him the cloth bundle. Then May did something neither adult expected. She stepped away from her father. The little girl reached out. She touched the hem of Adeline's faded green dress. Adeline knelt until they were eye to eye. She didn't care about the stains on her knees. "Hello, May." The little girl didn't speak, but she didn't pull her hand away. Adeline smiled gently. "I'm going to take care of you now." She followed the children into the house. The interior was worse than she had imagined, thus. Stacks of dirty tin plates sat on the wooden table. The hearth was cold and filled with gray ash. There was a heavy smell of old grease and neglect. It was a house that had lost its soul. Adeline rolled up her sleeves. She found a rusted bucket. She found a scrap of coarse cloth. She cleaned until her aching arms could barely lift. By sunset, the house was not spotless, but for the first time in months, it felt cared for. Adeline found a bag of beans and put them to simmer. The rich smell of coffee began to fill the room. It was the smell of life returning to a dead place. Garrett came in when the sky turned purple. He stopped in the doorway. His shadow fell long over the clean floor. He looked at the table. He looked at his children. They were sitting quietly by the fire. Adeline had washed their faces. She had combed the tangles out of May's hair. Garrett took off his hat. "Dinner is ready, Mr. Thorne," she said. He sat at the head of the table. He ate in a heavy, contemplative silence, but he ate every single bite. That night, Adeline slept in a small room off the kitchen. The cot was narrow and hard, but it was warm. For the first time in months, she felt safe. The next morning, the real work began. Adeline found an old cedar chest in the attic. It had belonged to Garrett's late wife, Sarah. Inside were bolts of fine fabric and lace. Adeline felt a sharp pang of guilt. She felt like she was walking in another woman's shoes. But then she saw a small, unfinished yellow dress. It was clearly meant for May. Adeline took out a needle and thread. She sat by the window and began to sew. As she worked, she thought of her own past. She remembered the terrible blizzard of 1888. Her younger sister Clara had been staying with relatives in Nebraska. The storm struck without warning. Clara never made it home from school. The memory made Adeline's eyes mist over. She could not think of that winter without pain. She felt she had failed to say goodbye. She looked toward Toby and May playing in the yard. She would do everything to keep these children safe. That evening, after the dishes were washed, May appeared in the kitchen doorway holding the unfinished yellow dress. She hugged it against her chest as if it were something precious. "Was this really meant for me?" she asked. Adeline glanced toward the cedar chest upstairs. "I believe your mother started it for you, say." May lowered her eyes. "I don't remember her sewing. You were very little," Adeline said gently. May touched the yellow fabric with one small finger. "Can you finish it?" Adeline's throat tightened. She understood what the child was truly asking. Not whether the stitches could be completed, whether something Sarah had begun could still belong to May without betraying the woman who was gone. "I can finish it," Adeline said, "but I won't change the part your mother made." May looked up. "Why? Because that part is hers." Adeline placed a hand over the unfinished seam, and the rest can be ours. There is something about this moment that still feels familiar today. American families are still talking about the cost of food and housing. To me, that makes Adeline's simple bargain feel surprisingly modern. She offered work in exchange for meals and a safe roof. More than a century changes a lot. But the need to feel useful and secure does not change. May was quiet for a moment. Then she leaned against Adeline's side from the doorway. Garrett watched without speaking. Wine had come in to ask about supper. Instead, he stood perfectly still. For the first time, he saw that Adeline was not trying to replace Sarah. She was making room for her memory. Something in his face softened. He turned away before either of them noticed. As the weeks passed, the ranch began to change. The garden was planted with potatoes and carrots. The fences were patched and strengthened. Garrett and Adeline barely spoke. They were like two gears in a silent machine. One evening, Adeline was sitting on the porch. She was working on a new quilt. It was a log cabin pattern. The center squares were bright red to represent the hearth. Garrett came and sat on the steps. He watched her fingers move with grace. My mother made a quilt exactly like that, he said. It was the most he had said in days. It's a symbol of a warm home, she said. We're building one now. Garrett, one stitch at a time. Garrett looked through the window. May was asleep on the settee. The yellow dress Adeline had finished was folded beside her. Toby sat at the table, reading his book. A lamp burned brightly between them. It was an ordinary scene, but Garrett had not seen peace like this in a year. They smile more now, he said quietly. Adeline looked at him. Garrett seemed almost embarrassed. You did that. No, Adeline said softly. They were only waiting for someone to notice them. Garrett looked at her for a long moment. So was I, he almost said, but the words never left his mouth. The stars above were like chips of ice. Suddenly, an angry shout broke the peace. Thorn, get out here. Garrett stood up instantly. His hand went to the pistol at his hip. A man on a black horse rode into the yard. It was Silas Henderson. He was a wealthy land speculator. He had been trying to pressure Garrett to sell. What do you want? Henderson Garrett's voice was a dangerous growl. Henderson sneered from his saddle. He looked at Adeline in her worn dress. I see you found yourself a plaything. Garrett. Is this the help everyone is talking about? Adeline felt a hot flush of shame. Garrett stepped off the porch. He walked to the head of Henderson's horse. That woman is under my protection, Garrett said, and she will soon be my wife. Henderson laughed. Wife. Since when? Thorn. Funny. I haven't heard about any wedding. Adeline saw the children at the window. Their eyes were wide with fear. Garrett grabbed the bridle of the horse. You'll hear about it soon enough. Now get off my land. Henderson saw the lethal look in Garrett's eyes. You won't hold this ranch forever. Henderson spat. He wheeled his horse and galloped away. The dust settled slowly in the moonlight. Adeline walked down to stand near Garrett. Thank you, she whispered, for defending my name. Garrett turned to look at her. His face was hard again. Don't mistake what I did, he said. His voice had gone guarded. Henderson would use any weakness against this family. I won't let him use you. He walked toward the barn without another word. Adeline felt a cold chill. Their arrangement was still just business. At least, that was what Garrett told himself. The next morning, Garrett found Toby repairing a loose hinge on the chicken coop. The boy was using the wrong end of a small hammer and muttering under his breath. Garrett took the tool from him. Here, he showed Toby how to steady the nail with 2 fingers. Toby tried again. This time the nail went in straight. Adeline said I should learn to fix things. Toby said. Garrett glanced toward the house. Did she? She says a home stays standing because everybody helps. Garrett almost smiled. That sounds like her. Toby hesitated. Then his voice dropped. Pop. Yes, is she really going to stay? Garrett's hand stopped on the hinge. He could answer questions about cattle, fences, storms, and broken wagon wheels. This one frightened him. I don't know, he admitted. Toby looked disappointed. Garrett placed a hand on his son's shoulder. But I know I want her to. Toby studied his father's face. You never said that about anybody. Garrett looked back toward the house. Through the open window, Adeline was laughing at something May had said. The sound carried across the yard. It had been a long time since laughter belonged there. No, Garrett said quietly. I suppose I haven't. The summer heat faded into autumn. In Wyoming, autumn is a short hallway to winter. The air smelled of dry grass and frost. Adeline preserved every vegetable she could find. She was preparing for a siege against the cold. One afternoon, she was teaching May to sew. Are you going to stay here forever? May asked. The question was a knife to Adeline's heart. She imagined May waking to another empty room. As long as you want me here, Adeline said. May leaned against her arm. Then I want forever. Toby came running into the house. Pa needs you, he shouted. A cow is stuck in the ravine. Adeline grabbed her shawl and followed. They ran across the high pasture. The wind was picking up speed. She found Garrett at a deep ditch. A heifer was trapped between 2 boulders. Garrett was trying to loop a rope around her. Hold the rope, Adeline. Garrett yelled. He climbed into the ravine. Adeline grabbed the rough hemp. She dug her heels into the dirt. The heifer lunged suddenly. A jagged rock sliced into Garrett's leg. He groaned and fell to his knees. Garrett, Adeline screamed. The cow scrambled up the other side. But Garrett was pinned. Adeline tied the rope to a tree. She slid down the embankment. Garrett was clutching his thigh. A dark stain was spreading across his trousers. "It's deep," he gasped. Adeline tore a strip from her petticoat. She pressed the cloth firmly against the wound. "You have to lean on me," she said. Garrett looked at her. He was twice her size. "You can't carry me back." "I don't have to carry you," she said fiercely. "I just have to hold you up." It took an hour to get back to the house. Every step was a battle. Adeline's breath came in ragged gasps. Her shoulders were on fire, but she did not let go. When they reached the porch, Garrett collapsed. The children were crying. "Be quiet and listen," Adeline snapped. "Toby, get the medicine box. Get water boiling." She moved with calm authority. Frontier families often had to rely on whatever help was close at hand. She cleaned the wound carefully. Garrett gripped the edge of the table. He never cried out. Adeline closed the cut with careful stitches. Her hands trembled only after she was finished. She covered him with the log cabin quilt. Garrett fell into a feverish sleep. Adeline sat by him all night. She watched his chest rise and fall. She realized she wanted more than a partnership. By morning, the fever broke. Garrett opened his eyes. He saw Adeline asleep in the chair. He reached out a shaking hand. He touched her hair with a tentative stroke. He remembered the coldness that had ruled him. But looking at Adeline, he felt a spark. By the third day of Garrett's recovery, May had appointed herself his nurse. She carried him water in a tin cup that was always filled too high. Half of it usually reached the bed. Garrett drank whatever remained without complaint. Toby brought wood for the stove and checked the cattle before breakfast. Adeline watched the children move around their father with a seriousness that made her heart ache. They had learned too young that the people they loved could disappear. One afternoon, Garrett woke to find May sitting beside him with the finished yellow dress folded across her knees. "Mrs. Miller says Mama started this," May said. Garrett's face changed. He touched the sleeve with the back of his fingers. "She did. Does it make you sad?" Garrett was quiet. "A little." May looked toward the kitchen where Adeline was preparing broth. "She said being sad doesn't mean we have to put it away." Garrett swallowed. "No." He looked at the yellow dress again. "She's right." May climbed carefully onto the edge of the bed. "Can I love Mama and Adeline?" Garrett closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, they were wet. "Yeah, sweetheart." He kissed the top of her head. "You never have to stop loving one person just because your heart makes room for another." Adeline heard the words from the doorway. She quietly stepped back before Garrett saw her, but she carried them with her for the rest of the day. Nearly 2 weeks later, Garrett was back on his feet. He still walked with a noticeable limp. One evening, he found Adeline in the kitchen. "I have something," he said. He handed her a small wooden box. Adeline opened it. Inside was a silver thimble. It was engraved with tiny roses. "I noticed the old one was cutting your finger," he said. Adeline felt tears prick her eyes. "Thank you." "Garrett," she whispered. He cleared his throat. "Henderson is coming back tomorrow. He's bringing a lawyer. He means to use our arrangement to shame you." Adeline looked down at the thimble. "Then what are we going to do?" Garrett stepped closer. He took her hands in his. We're going to make it real." "Adeline, truly and legally real. I'll ride to town tonight for the preacher. I know I've been hard to live with. But you stopped feeling like an employee long ago. You became the person I look for. I don't want to imagine this place without you. I want you to be my wife. For real this time." Adeline looked into his blue eyes. "Yes," she said, "I want that more than anything." Later that evening, after the children had gone to bed, Garrett found Adeline alone by the hearth. She was turning the silver thimble slowly between her fingers. "You're quiet," he said. Adeline looked into the fire. "I keep wondering whether tomorrow changes anything." "It changes everything." "Does it?" She finally looked at him. A preacher can make me your wife on paper. Her voice softened. But paper cannot make me belong here. Garrett stood very still. Adeline immediately regretted saying it. Then he crossed the room and stopped in front of her. You already belong here. She searched his face. Garrett continued before courage deserted him. I'll belong in the kitchen when May is under your feet. You belong on that porch with your sewing. You belong beside Toby when he pretends he doesn't need help with his reading. A faint smile touched Adeline's mouth. Garrett took one more step, and you belong beside me. The room went quiet except for the fire. Adeline looked down at the thimble. That sounds dangerously close to love. Garrett Thorne, for once, he did not hide behind silence. Maybe I'm tired of being afraid of that word. Adeline's eyes filled. Garrett lifted her hand and pressed it gently against his chest. His heart was beating hard beneath her palm. Tomorrow is not the beginning, he said. It's only the day we finally put a name to what has already started. Adeline smiled through her tears. Then, for the first time, she rested her forehead against his shoulder. Garrett did not move away. The next morning, the preacher arrived. Toby and May were in their best clothes. Adeline wore her green dress, pressed and mended. She had pinned wildflowers to her collar. They stood before the preacher and the Bible. I do, Garrett said. His voice was clear and strong. I do, Adeline replied. Just as they finished, a carriage pulled in. Silas Henderson stepped out with a man in a black suit. They walked in without an invitation. I came prepared to prove this woman has no legal place here, Henderson said. Once the county hears the truth, I'll force a sale. The preacher stepped forward. Then you came too late, Mr. Henderson. Henderson froze. The preacher lifted the marriage record. I witnessed their vows myself this morning. Garrett and Adeline Thorne are legally married. Henderson stared at the signed record. The confidence drained from his face. Whatever scandal he had hoped to use against Garrett was gone. The lawyer beside him quietly closed his case. Garrett placed an arm around Adeline's waist. You heard him, Garrett said. Now leave my family alone. Henderson's face turned bright red. He turned and stomped out. The room was silent for a long moment. Then May ran across the room. She threw her arms around Adeline. Does this mean you're my real mama now? Adeline froze. She had stopped believing she would ever hear that word. Adeline dropped to her knees. She gathered May into her arms. If you'll have me, she sobbed. May buried her face against her shoulder. I already do. Toby stepped closer. He simply slipped his hand into Adeline's. Garrett turned his face away to hide his tears. The winter of 1889 came down hard. Bitter cold swept across the ranges. But inside the Thorne house, the fire was roaring. The walls were insulated with quilts and care. The cellar was full of food. Adeline taught Toby to read by candlelight. Garrett carved toys for May. One night, Garrett took Adeline's hand. I thought this house needed a nanny. He squeezed her fingers. Turns out I was the one who needed you most. Years passed. The Thorne ranch grew stronger. Adeline and Garrett had 3 more children. Toby grew into a fine rancher. May became a teacher in Cheyenne. Eventually, grandchildren filled the yard. Adeline kept that old cloth bundle in the attic. She never wanted to forget how close she came to giving up. The log cabin quilt remained on their bed for decades. One evening, many years later, Adeline stood on the porch. She watched her grandchildren run through the grass. Garrett came to stand beside her. His hair was silver now. He took her hand. Adeline remembered the frightened widow she once was. She had come looking for work. Instead, she had found a family. Garrett squeezed her hand. Cold, he asked. Adeline smiled. Not anymore. Behind them. The house glowed warmly. Adeline leaned against her husband. She was finally home. If Adeline and Garrett's second chance touched your heart, tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Subscribe for more Western romance stories about love, family, and finding home. This is a fictional Western romance inspired by life on the 19th century American frontier. Characters and events are dramatized for storytelling. AI-assisted tools may have supported parts of the creative process. The final story and presentation were directed by the channel creator.